There's a chair in my living room that nobody sits in anymore. It was Margaret's chair. High-backed, floral. She picked it out sometime in the late 80s. I always thought it was ugly, honestly. Too much pattern, too many colors for one piece of furniture. I told her that once. She laughed and bought it anyway. After she passed, I couldn't move it. Couldn't look at it either, for a while. But eventually, you stop seeing the things that hurt you, and they just become furniture. They just become part of the room. That chair sits next to the window now, and most mornings I sit across from it with my coffee, and I think about who I thought would be in this house by now. I want to be careful here, because what I'm about to say is not a complaint. I'm not looking for sympathy, and I'm not interested in making anyone the villain of this story. I've had 82 years on this earth, which is more than a lot of people get, and I know that. So when I say what I'm about to say, I want you to hear it the way I mean it, which is quietly and honestly and without blame. I thought my children would be here. Not every day. I'm not unreasonable. I didn't picture them sitting around the kitchen table every Sunday like some old television show. I thought they'd be closer. Physically, emotionally. I thought old age would bring us together in some way I couldn't fully picture when they were young, but that I assumed would just happen, naturally, the way things were supposed to. I have 3 children. Karen is 56 now. Lives about 4 hours away in another state. She's got 2 kids of her own, a job that takes up most of her energy, and a husband I've always liked well enough but never quite understood. We talk on the phone maybe twice a month. She calls on my birthday and on Christmas. Sometimes Easter. She's not cold. She asks how I'm doing. She means it, I think. But the calls are short. They always find a natural end before I'm ready for them to. My son David is 53. He's the one I butted heads with most when he was young. Strong-willed, stubborn. I always said he got it from his mother, and Margaret always said he got it from me, and we were both probably right. David lives about 2 hours away. He comes by maybe 4 or 5 times a year. He's good about fixing things when he comes. Replaces a faucet, checks the gutters. He's practical. He shows love through doing. I understand that. I'm not sure I always appreciated it the way I should have. And then there's Elise. She's the youngest, 49. She moved to another country, Canada, which isn't so far on a map but is very far in practice, about 15 years ago for her husband's work, and she stayed. She calls more than the other 2, actually. Long calls sometimes. But there's a strange distance to a voice that's coming from that far away. You can feel the miles in it. So that's my family. 3 good people. People I raised, people I love, people I would do anything for without thinking twice, and people who are, for all practical purposes, not really in my life in the way I imagined they would be. Now here's the thing I've been sitting with for the past few years. The thing I couldn't say out loud for a long time because it felt like a betrayal to even think it. I'm lonely. Not in a desperate way. Not in a way that scares me. Just the quiet kind of lonely that settles into a house when it's been quiet too long. The kind that you don't notice until you catch yourself talking to the dog about something that happened on the news, and then realize the dog has been gone for 3 years. Margaret died in 2019, just before everything else fell apart in the world, which meant that the last few years have been the quietest years of my life, in a house that used to have so much noise in it, I sometimes went to the garage just to think. I remember when the kids were teenagers, the phone ringing constantly, Music I didn't understand coming through the walls. Arguments about curfews and borrowed cars and whether or not someone had done their homework. I was so tired back then. Margaret and I were both working. I was trying to build something, a career, a life, a stable thing. And the noise felt like something I was enduring rather than enjoying. I didn't know I'd miss it. I didn't think about missing it at all. I just thought one day things would be calmer, and that calm would be good. It is calm now, and some of it is good. But some of it is just empty, and I had to learn to tell the difference. I used to make too much food. That was one of the first signs I wasn't adjusting well. Margaret always cooked for a family, and I learned from her. So after she was gone, I'd find myself standing at the stove making enough pasta for 6 people, and then sitting down to eat it alone and feeling like I'd made some kind of mistake. Not a tragic mistake, just a small, stupid mistake that reminded me what was different. You do strange things when you're adjusting to being alone. You keep rhythms that don't make sense anymore. I kept the television on in the evenings, not because I was watching it, but because I didn't want to hear the silence. I kept 2 coffee cups on the counter for about 4 months before I noticed I was still doing it. Things like that. And through all of it, I think I was waiting, quietly waiting, without fully admitting it even to myself, for my kids to show up. Not in a formal way, not with boxes and plans, just more. More presence, more calls, more of the feeling that they were aware I was here, sitting in this house with Margaret's chair and too much pasta and a television I wasn't really watching. I mentioned it once to David. We were having dinner at his house. This was maybe a year after Margaret passed. And the conversation got to a certain point where I said something like, "It gets quiet, you know. The house gets quiet." And I looked at him when I said it. And he nodded and said, "I know, Dad," and then changed the subject to something about his truck. I don't think he was being cruel. I really don't. I think he heard what I said and didn't know what to do with it, so he moved past it. That's what people do with things they don't know how to carry. They set them down and walk away, hoping someone else will pick them up. No one picked it up. Now, there is something I've had to be honest with myself about, and I'll share it with you because it matters. Because I spent a long time feeling disappointed in my children before I started looking at what I'd actually built with them. And when I looked, really looked, I had to sit with some uncomfortable things. I was not a present father when they were young. I mean that in the literal sense. I was there, physically. I was in the house. I made it to school plays and some of the games. I fixed things when they broke and paid for things when they cost money. But I was also distracted a lot of the time. I was inside my own head, inside my own concerns, inside the ongoing project of building a life that would be secure enough that none of us had to worry. What I didn't build, as well as I should have, was the habit of being close. Margaret was the one who talked to them. She knew what was going on in their lives, who their friends were, what was worrying them, what they were excited about. I knew the surface of their lives. I knew their grades and their sports and their general direction. But the interior of who they were becoming, that was Margaret's territory. And I suppose I was fine with that at the time, because it meant I could focus on other things. I think about what that taught them without meaning to. I think it taught them that men in families operate at a certain distance, that you love the people in your house by working for them and providing for them and being steady, and that the emotional closeness, the regular reaching out, the sitting down and just being there, that's someone else's job. So now I wonder sometimes if my children are distant from me, in part because I showed them how to be. That's a hard thing to arrive at. Took me a few years of turning it over to get there. And I'm still not entirely sure what to do with it, except sit with it and be honest about it, which is what I'm doing now. Karen once said something to me, this was maybe 2 years ago over the phone, that I've thought about many times since. She said, "Dad, I never really knew how to talk to you. You were always somewhere else, even when you were in the room." She said it gently. She wasn't trying to wound me, but it landed. I wanted to argue with her. My first instinct was to explain myself, to account for all the reasons why a man of my generation, of my circumstances, carried himself the way he did. But I didn't. I just said, "I know. I'm sorry about that." And then the call ended the way they always do, a bit too soon. But she said something true, and I think it explains a lot about where we are now. You can love someone your whole life and still be a stranger to them in certain ways. That's one of the things nobody prepares you for. You assume love is a guarantee of closeness. It isn't. Closeness is something you have to actually build, with time and attention and the willingness to be present in all the ordinary moments that don't feel like they matter, but are actually everything. Margaret built that with them. She was in it all the time. And when she left, some of what connected us left with her. She was the bridge. She was the one who kept the relationships active, who called them, who remembered the details, who pulled everyone toward the center. Without her, we've all drifted slightly. Not dramatically, not irrevocably, but the gravity is different. I think a lot of men my age are discovering this, that without their wives, without whoever was the center of their family's orbit, they find themselves slightly disconnected from the people they've known their whole lives. Not estranged, just orbiting more loosely, and not quite knowing how to close the distance on their own. Because some of us were never taught how to reach out. It wasn't something the men in my family did. You didn't call someone just to talk. You called because there was something to say, something to arrange, something that needed doing. A phone call for its own sake felt indulgent. It felt like bothering people. So I didn't call. I waited to be called. And when the calls didn't come often enough, I took it personally, without ever saying so. Which is, if I'm being honest, a kind of cowardice. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet, dignified kind that looks like patience, but is actually just fear of asking for what you need. I didn't want to be a burden. That was the other thing. You reach a certain age and you become very aware of being a burden. You don't want to be the old father who calls too much and needs too much and reminds his children of what's coming eventually. So you hold back. You keep things measured. You say you're fine when they ask because you don't want to drop your problems into their already full lives. And so they think you're fine. And so they don't call as often as they might if they knew you weren't quite as fine as you said. It's a loop, a perfectly sealed, self-sustaining loop. And it took me an embarrassingly long time to see it. There was a Sunday, I remember this very clearly. It was maybe 18 months ago, sometime in the fall. I'd spent the day doing not much. Walked around the yard a bit, made lunch, read for a while, watched some television, and by evening I realized I hadn't spoken to a single person all day. Not one. And I didn't feel devastated by that. That's the part that troubled me. I was so accustomed to it that it felt normal. A whole day of silence, and my main reaction was a kind of mild observation, like noticing the weather. That's when I knew something had to change. Not dramatically. I'm not the type for dramatic changes, but something small, something that interrupted the pattern. I started going to a coffee shop in the mornings, 3 or 4 times a week. There's one about 8 minutes from the house. Nothing special about it. Small place, regulars. I don't go to make friends exactly, but I go because being around people, even strangers, even just the noise and movement of people ordering coffee and talking on their phones and reading on their laptops, it does something. It reminds your body that it's part of the world, that there are people out there doing their things, and you are one of them. I started a correspondence with an old colleague, a man named Gerald, who I'd worked with years ago and lost touch with the way you lose touch with people when life gets busy. I don't know what made me look him up. I found him through his son's email, actually. Took a bit of doing. Wrote him a letter, an actual letter, on paper. Told him I was thinking of him and hoped he was well. He wrote back 2 weeks later. We've been corresponding since. He lives in Oregon. We've never discussed meeting in person. That's not really the point. The point is the letters. The point is someone who knew me a long time ago and remembers things I'd forgotten about myself. And my children. My children I've tried to be more honest with. Not dramatically. I'm not going to suddenly become someone I never was. But I called Karen on a Thursday 2 months ago. No occasion, no reason. And when she said, "Is everything okay?" I said, "Yes. I just called to talk." She sounded surprised. We talked for 40 minutes about nothing important, about everything ordinary. It was the longest conversation we'd had in years. I don't tell you this as a success story. I tell you because it surprised me. How much was available, just waiting. How little it took to unlock it. And how long I'd sat waiting for the door to open from the other side when I could have just knocked. I think the hardest thing about being old, older at least, is the renegotiating of your expectations. You spend a lifetime building a picture of how things will be. You do it without even knowing you're doing it. You don't sit down one day and draw out a plan. But somewhere in you, there's an image, a version of the future that feels like what you've earned. And old age has a way of being quite different from that image. Not worse always, different. Some things better. I sleep when I want to sleep. I eat what I want to eat. I have no one to answer to but myself, which at 25 would have sounded like freedom, and at 82 sounds more complicated. There's a kind of peace in my days that I genuinely value. I'm not being falsely positive when I say that. My mornings are mine in a way they never were when I was working, when the kids were young, when life was full of things that needed doing. But the picture I had, the one with family close by, with grandchildren underfoot, with the house having some life in it still, that picture hasn't come true the way I expected. And I've had to grieve that quietly, the same way you grieve other expectations that life doesn't fulfill. Not with a funeral, with a slow, private letting go. My grandchildren are lovely, truly. Karen's kids are in their 20s now, good people, but I'm not in their lives in any significant way. I'm the grandfather they see at Christmas and feel slightly formal around. We don't have a language together. We haven't built one, and that's no one's fault exactly. It's just what happens when people don't have the time or proximity to develop ease with each other. I used to see my own grandparents often when I was young, my mother's father especially. I spent whole summers at his house. I knew the smell of his kitchen and the sound of his voice first thing in the morning, and the way he made his coffee and the stories he told more than once without realizing. That's not something I have with my grandchildren, and it's not something they have with me. I wonder if they'll sit, someday, in their own old age, and think about what they missed with me, or whether there wasn't enough there to miss. I'd like there to be something to miss. So I've started doing one thing with Karen's younger one. He's 22, name's Jacob. I've started sending him emails, long ones sometimes, about things that happened in my life that he'd never know otherwise. A few weeks ago, I wrote him about the first car I ever owned, a 1968 Ford Falcon, blue, rusted along the bottom, drove it into the ground by 1972. I told him what it felt like to be 25 and drive that car and feel like the world was just beginning. He wrote back 2 lines, said it sounded like a good car, asked if I had any photos. I didn't have any photos, but he asked. That was something. I'm not sure what I'm trying to tell you, honestly. I sat down to think through this, and it's come out messier than I expected, which is probably how it should come out, because it is messy. It doesn't resolve cleanly. I love my children. They love me. We are not estranged. We are not angry at each other. We have never had a falling out that couldn't be recovered from. By every visible measure, we are a fine family. And still, there is a gap. There has always been a gap, I think, and I only started to feel its real size when I had nowhere else to look. When the distractions fell away, and it was just me and the chair and the quiet. I think what I wanted, what that image in my head was made of, was something I never quite built the foundation for. I wanted warmth and closeness and the comfortable ease of people who know each other deeply. But you don't get that automatically. You earn it over time, in thousands of small moments of attention and presence and asking and listening. And I spent a lot of those moments somewhere else, inside the project of my life, thinking I had time to get to the closer things later. Later is now. And some of what I didn't build, I can't build from here. But some of it I can. Maybe. In whatever time I have left, I can be more honest. I can reach out first. I can tell the people I love that I think about them, not just when there's something that needs saying. I can write to Jacob about the Ford Falcon and sit with whatever comes back, even if it's only 2 lines. It's not the life I pictured, but then I'm not sure the life I pictured was ever really available to me. It might have been a version of things that required a different me to build it. And that me, the more open one, the less distracted one, he didn't quite exist, back then when it would have mattered most. I'm closer to him now, I think. Funny how that works. Margaret would probably have something to say about all of this. Knowing her, she'd say it in about 2 sentences and then get back to whatever she was doing. She had a way of cutting to the real thing without making a production of it. One of the many ways I miss her that I couldn't have listed in advance. You don't know what you'll miss about a person until they're gone. You know you'll miss them, but the specific shape of the missing, the way you'll feel it at strange hours, in small moments, in the fact of a chair no one sits in, that you can't know ahead of time. I suppose the same is true of time itself. You know in some general sense that you won't always have it, but you don't feel the truth of that until the available amount gets short enough to count differently. And by then, you're working with what you have left, not what you had. I've stopped wishing things were different than they are. That took a while, but I got there. And I've started, slowly, imperfectly, trying to build the things I can still build. Not because I think I can make up for what wasn't built before, but because there is still some time. And I'd rather spend it reaching toward the people I love than sitting across from an empty chair and feeling sorry about a picture that didn't come true. Maybe that's enough to do. Maybe, at 82, that's actually quite a lot.